In 1991, Nirvana changed the course of music history, but what if they didn't? What if Nevermind never took off, and Kurt Cobain remained just another struggling musician? This is the story of an alternate reality, one where Nirvana never made it. Let's rewind to 1988. Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic formed Nirvana in Aberdeen, Washington. They play grimy bars, record a demo, and eventually catch the attention of Sub Pop, an indie label fueling the Seattle grunge movement. But what if they never got signed? Or what if their first album sank into complete obscurity? Maybe they never even got a shot at recording their iconic album. Without Sub Pop's backing, Nirvana's debut never gained traction. No Nevermind, no Smells Like Teen Spirit, no explosion of grunge culture. Kurt Cobain, instead of becoming a reluctant icon, remains an underground artist, scraping by with odd jobs. In this reality, Cobain's frustration with the industry and his own artistic perfectionism only deepens. Maybe he forms another band. Maybe he drifts further into experimental music, closer to the raw sound of his heroes, like the Melvins or Sonic Youth, but without ever finding an audience beyond a cult following. Without Nirvana's breakout success, the grunge movement remains underground. Hair metal doesn't die so quickly. Alternative rock never dominates the mainstream. Would bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains still rise to prominence? Or would grunge stay confined to Seattle's rainy streets? And what about the millions of teenagers who found solace in Cobain's raw honesty? Would another artist have taken his place? Would Generation X have found a different voice? Or would the spirit of rebellion take another form entirely? So what happens to Kurt Cobain? Maybe he remains a local legend in the Pacific Northwest, releasing obscure records and painting in his spare time. Maybe he eventually leaves music altogether, retreating into his art. Maybe he gets lost in addiction without the resources or support that fame, ironically, both enabled and tormented him with. Would he still be alive today? Would he have found peace in obscurity? Or would the same demons that haunted him in our reality still lead him down a tragic path? In this timeline, Nirvana is just another lost band, a footnote in music history, a what could have been. Maybe one day, some crate-digging music nerd rediscovers them. Maybe their raw sound inspires a new underground movement, but the world never knows the power of Smells Like Teen Spirit. One band, one moment, one album. The right song at the right time changed everything. It's a reminder that history is fragile, that sometimes the biggest cultural revolutions rest on a knife's edge. Would Kurt Cobain still be alive if Nirvana never became famous? Would Kurt have continued making music, or would he have eventually quit and focused on visual art instead? Would Dave Grohl have ever joined Nirvana, or would he have taken a different path in music? What kind of music would Nirvana have made if they stayed in obscurity? Would it have been even more experimental and underground? Would Kurt have found peace in being a small, cult-followed artist rather than a global rock icon? Would Chris Novoselic have stayed in music or pursued a different career path earlier on? Would Kurt have formed another band or kept searching for a musical breakthrough in a different way? If Nirvana stayed underground, would they have eventually been rediscovered decades later as a lost gem of the grunge scene? Would MTV and mainstream music have embraced alternative rock as heavily without Nirvana's influence? Would the 90s youth have found a different musical voice for their angst? Or would they have gravitated toward hip-hop, industrial rock, or punk? Would labels have invested in signing alternative bands like they did post-Nirvana? Or would the industry have stayed focused on polished pop and rock? Would we have seen the same explosion of indie and DIY bands if Nirvana hadn't proved that a raw, unpolished sound could succeed? Would emo, post-grunge, and pop-punk still have evolved the way they did without Nirvana's influence? Would Foo Fighters ever exist if Nirvana had remained obscure and Dave Grohl never got the mainstream exposure from being in the band? So what do you think? Would the world be better or worse if Nirvana never made it? These questions could lead to fascinating discussions about fate, influence, and the fragile nature of music history. Do any of these stand out to you? Let me know how you think the world of music would have evolved differently if Nirvana never made it big.